Today, we are about to witness an extraordinary debate, one that will challenge many minds. This is not just an ordinary discussion, it is one that will open doors to profound insights and possibly change a person's perspective on life itself. Imagine a 5-year-old Muslim child, Afnan Sayyibil, who has memorized all 30 juz of the Qur'an and understands its interpretation. His intelligence is not only astonishing but has also become a widely discussed topic in various circles. His ability to analyze the meaning of the Qur'an runs so deep that it seems as though he possesses a level of understanding far beyond his age. On the other side, we have Dr. Octavius Benson, a 64-year-old atheist scientist who has dedicated his life to researching science and philosophy. He is well known for his skepticism toward religion, frequently criticizing faith-based beliefs and insisting that everything must be proven through scientific methods. For years, he has engaged in debates with religious scholars and philosophers, always believing that logic and science hold the ultimate answers to life. However, this time, things are different. His opponent is not a professor, not an academic, not a religious leader with prestigious titles. His opponent is a 5-year-old boy. The beginning of this debate was completely unexpected. It all started at a discussion event held at a prestigious university in London, where Dr. Octavius Benson was delivering a seminar titled, "Why Religion is Just an Illusion." The event was attended by scientists, students, and various academic figures. Among the audience sat little Afnan Sayyibil, who had come with his father. When the question and answer session began, a small hand suddenly rose from the middle of the crowd. At first, Dr. Benson smiled faintly, assuming it was just an innocent question from a child. However, as soon as Afnan spoke, the atmosphere in the room shifted. "Can you see the air?" Afnan asked in a soft yet confident voice. Dr. Benson paused for a moment before chuckling. "Of course, we can't see the air, but we know it exists because we can measure it scientifically." Afnan smiled. "So you believe in something you cannot see?" A few murmurs spread through the audience. The debate, which had initially felt formal, now began to take on a different tone. Dr. Benson, who was used to debating with seasoned academics, now found himself responding to a profound question from a 5-year-old. "Science has instruments to measure air. We can prove its existence through experiments," Benson answered, maintaining his composure. Afnan nodded. "Then what about breathing?" Dr. Benson frowned. "What do you mean?" "When someone dies, they stop breathing, even though their lungs still have oxygen around them. So, what is missing?" A deep silence fell over the room. Afnan's question was simple, yet it struck at the heart of the argument about existence itself. Dr. Benson took a deep breath. "What is missing is the biological activity of the body. When the brain stops working, all body systems shut down." Afnan gave a small smile. "So what is missing is not just air, but something that makes the air meaningful to the body, something that cannot be seen, yet we know it exists." Dr. Benson fell silent. The debate had just begun, yet he could already sense that this was no ordinary child. Dr. Octavius Benson remained quiet for a moment. He had never expected that such a simple question from a 5-year-old could lead him into deep contemplation. For years, he had debated with professors, scientists, and theologians, but never had he felt so cornered in just a few sentences. The previously buzzing room was now silent. The audience waited eagerly. Some students who had been busy taking notes had now lifted their heads, their eyes filled with curiosity. Dr. Benson cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the conversation. "All right, let's discuss this scientifically. When a person dies, what happens is cell death. The heart stops pumping blood, the brain loses its activity, and the body ceases to function, not because something leaves the body, but because the biological system is no longer working." Afnan nodded slightly, showing that he was listening carefully. Then, in an innocent tone, he asked, "So, according to you, Humans are nothing more than a collection of chemical and electrical reactions in the body? Scientifically, yes, Benson answered firmly. Our consciousness, our thoughts, they are all the result of reactions in the brain. Afnan looked at Dr. Benson with clear eyes. If we are just a collection of chemical reactions, then why do humans have awareness of themselves? How can we ask, reflect, and find meaning in life? How can we have morality? Dr. Benson pressed his lips together. Morality develops over time through evolution. Humans build moral systems to survive as a species. Afnan smiled slightly. If that's the case, does that mean morality can change? In the past, killing was commonplace. Does that mean killing was not inherently wrong? A student in the front row turned to his colleague and whispered. His question is very sharp. Dr. Benson realized that he was being cornered, and not by a professor, but by a small child. He had to be careful in answering. In a certain context, what is right and wrong can indeed change, Dr. Benson said. It depends on social norms and the development of civilization. Afnan seemed to think for a moment, then said, So if one day humans decide that stealing is a natural thing, does that mean stealing becomes something good? Dr. Benson took a deep breath. Ethically, there are fixed principles and some that change. We make laws based on social agreements in order to live together in peace. Afnan nodded. But if all of that is just a human agreement, that means good and bad have no absolute basis. That would mean it is possible that one day, things that are now considered evil will become good, and vice versa. A professor sitting in the middle row crossed his arms over his chest, his eyes fixed on Afnan with interest. He whispered to his colleague, This child doesn't just memorize the Qur'an, he also has very sharp logic. Meanwhile, Dr. Benson began to feel cornered. He had never expected that the concept of morality he had been teaching for years could be questioned so deeply, especially by a small child. Finally, he said, Okay, Afnan, if you believe that morality comes from something absolute, where does it come from? Afnan smiled. From Allah. The answer was simple, yet it carried a great burden. Dr. Benson snorted softly. That is too easy an answer. I want proof. Afnan looked at him calmly. You said earlier that we believe in air even though we can't see it because we can feel it. You also believe in morality even though we can't measure it physically. Then why do you reject the existence of Allah, even though His signs are all around us? The room fell silent once again. Some of the audience began to nod slowly, impressed by the way this 5-year-old thought. Dr. Benson tried to contain the tension that was starting to build. He knew that if he didn't turn things around soon, he would lose control of the debate. In a firmer voice, he said, Well, if God does exist, why is there so much suffering in this world? Why do people suffer from hunger, war, and disease? Afnan didn't answer right away. He looked at Dr. Benson with an expression that seemed to say he had been prepared for this question. Dr. Benson, he said gently, if a person holds a book but does not understand the words in it, does that mean the book has no meaning? Dr. Benson frowned. No, that just means the person hasn't learned to read. Afnan nodded. The same applies to life. When we see suffering, it doesn't mean life has no meaning, it means we don't understand what it means. The room went silent again. Some people seemed surprised by the way this boy thought. God created the world with tests. Afnan continued. A student who does not understand will think the questions are difficult. But for those who understand, they know that every question has an answer. This world is a test for humans. For those who want to think, they will find the answer. Dr. Benson began to feel uneasy. He couldn't deny that life was full of tests, and that many things were difficult to explain with science alone. However, as a scientist, he couldn't accept something without concrete evidence. But how can you be sure that Allah exists? He asked. Have you ever seen Him? Afnan smiled. Have you ever seen your own mind? Dr. Benson blinked in surprise. Can you show the physical form of your consciousness? Of your love? Of your hope? Dr. Benson sighed. No, those are abstract concepts. Afnan nodded. So is Allah. We cannot see him directly, but we can see signs of his existence, just like how we cannot see the wind, but we can feel its coolness. The room was now filled with whispers. The audience looked shocked, amazed, and some even began to ponder silently. Dr. Benson realized that he was in a difficult position. For the first time in his life, he felt that he did not have a satisfactory answer. But he was not a man who gave up easily. He looked at Afnan sharply and said, Then, if Allah does exist, why doesn't he show himself directly so that everyone will believe? Afnan smiled softly. He looked at Dr. Benson as if he wanted to give an answer that would shake his belief. But before he could speak, a voice suddenly came from the back of the room. I want to know the answer too. All heads turned toward the source of the voice. An old man with a face full of doubt stood there. His eyes showed that he had been searching for an answer to this question for a long time. The debate had just reached its critical point. And it was far from over. The room grew quieter. All eyes were now fixed on the old man standing at the back. His hair had turned completely white, his face etched with deep wrinkles, an undeniable testament to the many years he had lived. But it was his eyes that held the most weight, reflecting years of searching for answers. Dr. Benson's gaze lingered on him in shock, recognition dawning upon him. He knew this man. Professor William Hartman? Benson finally asked, his voice laced with uncertainty, as if trying to confirm that his eyes were not deceiving him. The old man nodded slowly. Yes, Octavius, he said, his voice steady yet filled with the depth of emotion. I have followed debates like these for many years, listening to arguments from scientists, theologians, and philosophers alike. But this time, it feels different. There is something in this discussion that compels me to listen further. He paused, then looked toward Afnan. I want to hear this child's answer. A tense silence filled the room. If even a scholar of Professor Hartman's stature wanted to hear Afnan's response, it was clear that this discussion had reached a level far beyond what anyone had initially expected. Afnan met the old man's gaze with quiet confidence before turning back to Dr. Benson. Earlier, you asked why God does not reveal himself directly so that everyone would believe. Afnan began. Dr. Benson nodded, his skepticism evident. Before I answer, Afnan continued, let me ask you something, Dr. Benson. Do you believe that the sun exists? Benson seemed slightly taken aback by the question, but he responded nonetheless. Of course. What if someone stubbornly refuses to believe in the sun? Afnan asked. Does that mean the sun does not exist? Benson exhaled, shaking his head. No, of course not. The sun exists regardless of whether someone acknowledges it or not. Afnan nodded. Exactly. The existence of Allah is not dependent on human belief. But now, let's address your main question. Why does Allah not reveal himself directly? Afnan paused, letting the suspense build in the room. Then, in a calm and measured tone, he answered, Because this life is a test. Dr. Benson frowned. A test? Afnan remained composed. Tell me, Dr. Benson, should a teacher sit beside his students during an exam and provide them with all the answers? Benson fell silent, the weight of the question settling over him. A test is meant to differentiate those who study and think from those who seek only easy answers. Afnan continued. If Allah were to reveal himself openly, there would be no room for faith or choice. Everyone would be compelled to believe, not out of conviction, but because they had no other option. Benson's expression tightened as he searched for a counterargument. Then why do so many people still believe in God, even though he has not revealed himself? Afnan smiled slightly. Because Allah has already provided enough signs for those who are willing to think. The universe is full of evidence, from the miracle of life to the precise laws of nature, from human consciousness to morality itself. Science alone cannot fully explain these things. Those who reflect upon them recognize that all of this is not mere coincidence. Whispers spread among the audience. Some students exchanged glances, while Professor Hartman continued to listen with rapt attention. Afnan pressed on. When we see a magnificent skyscraper, we instinctively know that an architect designed it, that workers built it. We would never assume that such a structure simply appeared by chance. So why, when faced with the far more complex and intricate design of the universe, do some insist that it came into existence without a creator? Dr. Benson swallowed hard. He wanted to refute the argument, but Afnan's logic was difficult to challenge. At that moment, Professor Hartman, who had been silently observing, finally spoke. His voice, though hoarse with age, carried a profound curiosity. You speak of a God who provides signs for those who think. But what of those who have only known suffering? Those who feel that life has been nothing but injustice, how can they believe in a merciful God? Afnan turned his attention to the professor, his gaze steady and thoughtful. It was evident that this question was not just an academic inquiry for the old man. It was something that had troubled him deeply for a long time. Professor Hartman, Afnan said gently, have you ever seen a patient undergo surgery? Hartman nodded. Of course. Does the patient experience pain? Hartman nodded again. Yes. But does the surgeon intend to harm the patient? Hartman hesitated, realization dawning upon him. No, he finally said. The surgeon's intent is to heal. Afnan's voice remained calm yet firm. To the patient, the pain of surgery may feel unbearable. But if he understood that this pain was necessary for his healing, he would endure it with patience. In the same way, suffering in life is often a means of purification, of preparing us for something greater, something we may not yet understand. A hushed silence filled the room as the audience absorbed the depth of Afnan's words. What we perceive as suffering, he continued, may, in fact, be Allah's way of guiding us, protecting us, or preparing us for something better. Those who lose something in this life may be saved from a greater calamity. Those who endure trials may be strengthened for a greater purpose. But like a patient undergoing surgery, we often cannot see the end result, we only feel the pain. Professor Hartman lowered his head, deep in thought. He had not expected such a profound response from a boy so young. Meanwhile, Dr. Benson's discomfort grew. He had always relied on logic and science to address the great questions of life. But for the first time, he felt as though logic alone was not enough. Afnan looked at him with a quiet, knowing expression. Dr. Benson, he said softly, let me ask you one final question. Benson met his gaze warily. If you are truly seeking the truth, Afnan asked, are you willing to open your heart? Benson sat in silence, deeply contemplating the question that had been posed to him. He knew this wasn't just another ordinary inquiry. It was a challenge to his long-held beliefs. Deep down, for the first time in his life, he began to doubt everything he had once held true. The room was still. Everyone was waiting for an answer from Dr. Octavius Benson. His hands clenched together, his gaze distant as he stared at Afnan Sayable. The whispering students had fallen silent. Even Professor William Hartman, who had remained seated, appeared distant, as though struck by a profound realization. Afnan looked at Benson calmly, not pushing him, not forcing him. He only wanted one thing, honesty. Are you truly seeking the truth? Are you willing to open your heart and consider what you've always rejected? The words echoed in Benson's mind, reverberating through decades of his life. For years, he had dedicated himself to academia, teaching that life was merely a random event, that there was no God, no afterlife. But today, a 5-year-old child had shaken everything he thought he knew. Benson closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and in an instant, memories from his past flooded back. He remembered his mother, who had always prayed despite the hardships they faced. He remembered his childhood when he still believed in God, before he became the scientist who rejected anything he could not prove with his own eyes. The turning point came when his father died in a tragic accident, and from that moment on, he vowed never to believe in what he couldn't see. Now, reflecting on it all, Benson realized something. His belief was not the product of a search for truth, but rather a response to anger and disappointment. He hadn't truly rejected God. He had been disappointed in him. Benson opened his eyes and looked at Afnan. His expression had changed. There was no arrogance, no cynicism, just confusion and curiosity. "I don't know," he said. "Can I open my heart to something I've always rejected? But for the first time, I feel like something's wrong with the way I think." Afnan smiled warmly. "It's okay, Dr. Benson. Every journey starts with a single step. The first question is the beginning of discovering the truth." Professor Hartman suddenly stood up, his expression serious, and looked at Benson. "Octavius, I need to say something." Benson nodded slowly, intrigued by his friend's words. "I've spent over 60 years of my life searching for answers. I've studied philosophy, ethics, science, everything about God and life. But tonight I realized that perhaps I've been looking in the wrong places," Hartman said. He turned to Afnan. "This boy speaks not just with logic, but with his heart. And that's something we often overlook as scientists." Benson, still processing, asked, "So what will you do, William?" Hartman smiled slightly and spoke in a calm voice. "I want to learn." Benson was taken aback. He never imagined that someone like Hartman, a highly respected academic, would admit to wanting to learn. Maybe it was time for him to consider the same. Afnan looked at both of them with wisdom. "Islam does not ask us to believe blindly. In fact, Islam encourages us to use both reason and the heart in the search for truth." Benson, deeply moved, nodded slowly. "I will read. I will look deeper. And if I find something that makes sense, I won't reject it just because of my pride." Afnan smiled brightly. "That's more than enough, Dr. Benson." The room broke into applause. Some students appeared moved, while others sat silently, reflecting on their own beliefs. In a corner, a journalist who had been documenting the debate quickly typed something on his phone and uploaded a video titled, "The Debate of a 5-Year-Old Muslim Child Shakes a Famous Atheist Scientist." The video went viral, reaching millions around the world. Moral lessons. 1. Truth can come from anyone. We often think that only those with advanced degrees or years of experience have the answers. But truth can come from anyone, even a small child, as long as they speak with sincerity. 2. Seek truth with both reason and heart. Knowledge is vital, but our hearts also play a crucial role in understanding life. Relying solely on logic without considering the heart can lead us to miss the true meaning of life. 3. Faith is a journey. Islam does not coerce anyone into belief. It invites everyone to think, question, and seek the truth with a sincere heart. 4. Ego can block the truth. Sometimes, we reject something not because it's wrong but because our pride prevents us from admitting we were wrong. Admitting we don't know is the first step towards finding the truth. What happened that night was more than just a debate. It was a convergence of two worlds, reason and heart, science and faith, confusion and hope. Dr. Benson hadn't found the answer yet, but he had taken the first step on his journey. As for Professor Hartman, after decades of searching, he had finally found the light he had been seeking. And Afnan Saibil, though just a 5-year-old boy, had shaken the world with his words. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. See you in the next video. The philosophy class was more lively than usual. Students from various departments had gathered not just to attend a lecture but to witness a highly anticipated discussion, a debate between reason and belief. A young Muslim student named Zirish was about to engage in a thought-provoking exchange with Dr. Brigida, a well-known philosophy professor famous for her skepticism about the existence of God. At the center of the room stood Dr. Brigitte, a 49-year-old woman with shoulder-length blonde hair and elegant glasses. She carried herself with confidence, a seasoned academic who believed that religion was nothing more than a cultural tradition rather than a reality that could be proven through logic. Meanwhile, in the front row, sat Zirish, an 18-year-old student with sharp eyes and unwavering conviction. She was intelligent, articulate, and always ready for debate. Today, she felt compelled to take up the professor's challenge. Dr. Brigitte gave a subtle smile before she began speaking. Today, we will discuss one of the most controversial topics in human history, God. Can anyone provide logical proof that God truly exists? I want rational arguments, not blind faith. The class fell silent. Some students hesitated, while others looked intrigued. Slowly, a few hands went up. A voice rang out confidently. I would like to answer that question, Doctor. Dr. Brigitte smirked slightly. Oh? A young student wants to take on the challenge of proving God's existence? Very well, I'm listening. Zirish took a deep breath and spoke in a steady voice. Before we discuss proof, I'd like to ask you something. Must everything in this world be perceived through the five senses in order to be considered real? Dr. Brigitte crossed her arms. Of course. If something cannot be seen, touched, heard, smelled, or felt, then it only exists in the imagination. Zirish smiled. All right. Then what about concepts like love, consciousness, or even logic itself? Can we see or touch logic? If we cannot perceive it with our senses, does that mean logic doesn't exist? The room filled with murmurs. Some students exchanged glances, intrigued by the question. Dr. Brigitte paused for a moment before responding. Love and logic can be felt. Their effects can be observed. God, on the other hand, is claimed to exist without any scientifically testable proof. Zirish nodded. So if something's impact can be felt, then it exists, even if it is invisible? Dr. Brigitte hesitated before replying. In theory, perhaps. Zirish smiled and continued. All right, then let's test whether God has an impact on human life or not. The room grew even more attentive. The intensity of the debate was undeniable. Some students adjusted their seats, while others quickly took notes. The discussion had only just begun, yet the tension in the room was unmistakable. Dr. Brigitte folded her arms across her chest, her sharp gaze locked onto Zirish. Her voice remained calm, but there was an unmistakable edge to her words. All right, Zirish, she said. You claim that God's presence can be felt through impact, but the real question is, does that impact truly come from God, or is it simply a psychological mechanism, humans seeking meaning in life? Zirish remained composed. She knew that this was a crucial moment. If she failed to respond convincingly, the debate could easily tilt in Dr. Brigitte's favor. I'll answer that question with an example. Zirish began. Imagine someone stranded in the middle of the ocean on a pitch-dark night. There's no land in sight, no light, no signs of life around them. In that moment, what do you think they will instinctively do? Some students nodded, sensing the direction of her argument. Maybe they will call for help, one student suggested. Exactly, Zirish affirmed. And whom will they call upon? The student hesitated for a moment before answering. Maybe God? Zirish nodded. Correct. In moments of extreme desperation, when all hope seems lost and there is no one else to turn to, people instinctively call out to something greater than themselves. Even those who previously denied the existence of God find themselves calling upon Him. Doesn't this suggest that deep within every human being, there is an innate awareness of God's existence? Dr. Brigitte gave a small, knowing smile, but it was clear she was not ready to concede so easily. That's an interesting argument, Zirish, she said. And so, the debate continued. Dr. Brigitte leaned forward slightly, her expression unwavering. But isn't that merely a psychological response to fear? When humans are cornered, they create an illusion of something that can save them. That is not proof of God's existence. It's simply a self-defense mechanism. Zirish nodded as if she had anticipated this response. All right, then let's take this discussion to a higher level, she said. We know that everything in this universe operates under an orderly system. Gravity keeps planets in orbit, the laws of thermodynamics regulate energy, and even the human body, with all its complexity, follows precise biological laws. If we come across a watch with an intricate and precise design, what would we conclude? Dr. Brigida gave a slight scoff. That someone designed it, of course. Zirish smiled. Exactly. We wouldn't assume that a watch simply came into existence by chance. Now, if something as small and simple as a watch requires a designer, then how could this vast and infinitely more complex universe exist without one? Some students began whispering among themselves. The argument was compelling, and it was clear that a few were beginning to see the logic in it. However, Dr. Brigida remained unfazed. That is the classic argument from design, she said, her voice steady. But there's a major flaw in it. If everything complex must have a creator, then who created God? A hush fell over the room. Some students who had been siding with Zirish now looked hesitant. This was a familiar counterargument, one that had been used time and again to challenge the concept of God. But Zirish did not waver. She looked directly at Dr. Brigida and responded. That question is based on a false assumption. Dr. Brigida raised an eyebrow. Oh? And what assumption is that? Zirish nodded. When we talk about things being created, we are speaking within the framework of this universe, a system bound by time, space, and the law of cause and effect. But God, by definition, is not part of this system. He is the creator of these very laws. Asking who created God is like asking where is the end of infinity. It is an irrelevant question because God exists beyond the boundaries of natural law. The room fell silent. Students were deep in thought, processing the argument. Some exchanged glances, while others scribbled notes furiously. Dr. Brigida, however, was not finished. Her sharp gaze remained fixed on Zirish. That's just an assertion, she countered. You're saying that God is exempt from these rules, but how can we be sure of that? How do we prove that God is not just a concept created by humans? Zirish remained composed. Let's consider another perspective, she said. If God does not exist, then what are we? Just a random collection of atoms and chemical reactions. Our consciousness is nothing more than an illusion. Morality is just a social construct, with no objective basis. And life, ultimately, has no inherent meaning beyond what we invent for ourselves. She let her words settle before continuing. But in reality, humans don't live that way. We instinctively feel that life has meaning. We long for justice, love, hope, and purpose. If there were no higher reality, where do these things come from? The murmurs in the room grew louder. Some students nodded in agreement, while others seemed deep in thought, searching for counterarguments. Dr. Brigida still wore a composed smile, but her eyes showed a hint of pressure. Zirish, she said, her voice measured. Your argument is interesting. And so, the debate continued. Dr. Brigida leaned forward, her expression still composed. Once again, all of that can be explained by evolution and the human need to survive. Morality evolved because it helped our species build an orderly society. Hope and love are just neurological mechanisms, survival tools in a world full of uncertainty. You don't need God to explain them. Zirish smiled unfazed. Then let's take this to a deeper level. If God does not exist, and everything is just the result of evolution and chemical reactions, then fundamentally, there is no real difference between humans and inanimate objects. We are just biological machines, without any actual purpose. She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. But let me ask you this. Can humans really accept that? If a small child is cruelly murdered, do we simply say, it was just the interaction of cells and chemicals and move on, without any moral outrage? Or deep down, do we all know that there is something greater, a concept of justice that transcends biology? Dr. Brigitte did not respond immediately. The debate had shifted beyond pure logic and into something more fundamental, human intuition. Some students seemed visibly affected, lost in thought. Then, from the back of the room, a male student raised his hand. Dr. Brigitte, with all due respect, he said, his voice hesitant but sincere. I'm starting to feel that there's something in Zirish's argument that's hard to deny. If God does not exist, then how do we explain the concept of universal justice? Why do we all seem to agree that there is an objective right and wrong? Dr. Brigitte turned her gaze to the student, then back to Zirish. She exhaled softly. You are indeed smart, she admitted. But this isn't over. I still have another question for you. Zirish smiled. I'm ready, Doctor. The classroom tensed. The students were now fully engaged, their eyes fixed on the two figures at the front of the room. Dr. Brigitte, the renowned philosophy professor known for her skepticism, crossed her arms, studying Zirish carefully. There was a slight flush on her face, not of frustration, but of deep contemplation. I won't deny that humans have moral intuition, she admitted. But does that mean God must exist? Or is it simply because humans need rules to coexist? Zirish nodded slowly. I understand your question, Doctor. It is true that humans need rules to maintain order. But if morality is just a social construct, then that means right and wrong are merely based on human agreement. In other words, if a group of people agrees that crime is acceptable, then it becomes morally legitimate for them. Is that what we believe? Dr. Brigitte hesitated. Perhaps, she said cautiously. History shows that morality does change. Slavery was once considered normal. Now, it is seen as a grave crime. Doesn't this prove that morality is a social construct? Zirish gave a small, knowing smile. Perhaps the form of morality changes, she agreed. But its essence remains. In every civilization, in every era, humans have had a concept of justice. Even the most evil person will feel anger if treated unfairly. Where does this moral awareness come from, if not from a higher source? Silence. The argument was simple, yet difficult to refute. Then, another student, who had been quiet until now, hesitantly raised his hand. Dr. Brigitte, I have a question. Dr. Brigitte gestured for him to speak. I've always wondered whether God exists or not, the student admitted. But now, I find myself thinking, if morality is just man-made, then how do we explain feelings of guilt? Why do we feel uneasy when we do something wrong, even when no one is watching? Dr. Brigitte did not answer immediately. She glanced at the student, then at Zirish. Your response, Zirish? Zirish looked at the student kindly. That, she said, is what we call human nature. Every human being is born with an innate sense of right and wrong. This isn't just about social conditioning, it's something deeper. Even young children, before they are taught societal rules, instinctively feel guilt when they do something wrong. This is evidence that within us, there are traces of the Creator. Dr. Brigitte took a slow, deep breath. She had not expected that her own students would start questioning her point of view. But as an academic, she would not back down easily. All right, she said at last. I admit your argument is compelling. But I want to take you to a much harder question. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze sharp. If God truly exists, then why is there so much suffering in this world? Why are children born into hunger? Why do good people face disasters? Why does evil thrive? If God is just, why does He allow such things to happen? A heavy silence filled the room. This was the classic question, The problem of evil. Some students nodded, as if agreeing that this was a difficult argument to counter. Even the student who had questioned morality now looked uncertain. But Zirish remained calm. She met Dr. Brigida's eyes and, in a softer, deeper voice, asked, "Doctor, before I answer your question, may I ask you something?" Dr. Brigida frowned slightly, caught off guard by the shift. "Go ahead. Have you ever faced great hardship in your life?" Dr. Brigida blinked. She had not expected the question to turn personal. For a moment, she hesitated, then nodded. "Of course. Everyone has." Zirish gave a gentle smile. "And after going through that hardship, did you become stronger?" Dr. Brigida's lips parted slightly. She was beginning to see where this was going. "I understand what you're implying," she said carefully. "You're saying that suffering makes us stronger. But what about those who never recover? What about children who starve to death before they can learn anything from their suffering?" Zirish took a deep breath. The debate was reaching its most critical point. Zirek knew this was the most emotional point in the debate. "Doctor," he said softly, "we often see the world from a narrow perspective. We see death as the end and suffering as absolute evil. But what if we look at it from a broader perspective?" Dr. Brigida frowned. "A broader perspective?" Zirek nodded. "Yes. If we believe that this life is temporary and there is life after death, then suffering in this world is not the end. Perhaps there are children who die of hunger, but we do not know God's plan for them in the afterlife. We perceive suffering as something negative. But what if suffering is actually a test, one that will be rewarded with something greater?" Some students began to murmur. This was a perspective they had not considered before. Rian raised his hand. "So, you're saying that God allows suffering as a test?" Zirek smiled. "Not just a test, but also a form of mercy that we may not always understand. Consider a child who cries when receiving an injection. He does not comprehend that it is for his own good. In the same way, we humans often fail to understand God's wisdom. But our lack of understanding does not mean there is no wisdom behind it." Dr. Brigida remained silent, her eyes reflecting deep thought. After a few moments, she spoke softly. "I'm still not sure, Zirek, but I must admit you've made me question things I always took for granted." Zirek smiled gently. "I'm not asking you to believe, Doctor. I only want us to think deeper. Sometimes the answers we seek are not in books but within our own hearts." The room fell silent. Even the skeptical students seemed lost in thought. This was not just an intellectual debate. It was a journey that had touched their hearts and minds. Dr. Brigida stood at the front of the class, her expression a mix of curiosity, admiration, and perhaps uncertainty. As a seasoned academic who had spent years studying philosophy, she was not one to concede easily. But after a long pause, she took a deep breath and spoke. "All right, Zirek, I must admit your arguments are strong. But before we end this discussion, I have one last question." Zirek nodded calmly. "Please, Doctor." Dr. Brigida met his gaze. "If God exists, and if He is truly all just and all loving, why doesn't He reveal Himself to us directly? Why does He let humanity argue over His existence instead of providing undeniable proof?" The class fell silent once more. Some students nodded, echoing the question in their own minds. Zirek took a deep breath. He knew this was the most difficult question, but he also knew the answer was in his heart. In a soft yet confident voice, he replied, "Doctor, let me ask you something in return. If a mother loves her child, does she have to constantly show herself for the child to know she exists? Or is her love enough, expressed through care, guidance, and signs that the child experiences every day?" Dr. Brigida remained silent. Zirek continued, "Likewise, God does not need to show Himself directly. His signs are all around us. Look at how the universe functions so perfectly, how the laws of physics operate with precision. All of this is proof of his existence, for those who choose to think and reflect. A student from the back suddenly spoke. Like how we know the wind exists even though we can't see it? We feel its touch, see the leaves move, and know it is real. Zirik smiled. Exactly. That is how God reveals himself, not through direct appearance, but through countless signs for those who are willing to see. Dr. Brigida was silent for a long moment. This time, she did not argue. Instead, she stared at Zirik, then at the class. Finally, she smiled faintly. I have to admit, this has been one of the most thought-provoking discussions I have ever had. She sighed before speaking again, her voice softer. And you, Zirik, have made me think more than I ever imagined. Zirik lowered his head slightly in respect. Thank you, Doctor. But I only shared what I believed to be the truth. The class buzzed with quiet murmurs. Some students exchanged glances, realizing they had just witnessed something profound. Dr. Brigida raised her hand, calling for silence. Before we conclude today's class, I want to leave you with one thought. In academia, we are taught to think critically. But critical thinking does not mean closing ourselves off to new perspectives. Today, I have learned something valuable from Zirik, that knowledge and faith do not have to be in conflict. And perhaps, not everything can be explained by logic alone. Zirik smiled. Thank you, Doctor. As the class ended, some students approached Zirik. Rian, who had previously identified as agnostic, looked at him seriously. I won't believe it right away, he admitted. But I think I will start searching for my own answers. Zirik placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. That's the most important thing, Rian. True understanding must come from a sincere heart. As Zirik stepped out of the room, he took a deep breath. Today had not just been a debate, it had been an intellectual journey, one that had opened many doors for those seeking the truth. And in his heart, he prayed that those who had listened today would one day find the light they sought. The lesson of this debate was not about winning or losing. It was about learning from different perspectives in the search for truth. The most important thing is not how fiercely we argue, but how deeply we are willing to reflect. The signs of God are all around us. Only those who open their hearts and minds will see them. Thank you for engaging in this thought-provoking discussion. May this story inspire us all to reflect more deeply on the nature of life. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. See you in the next video. In a magnificent debate hall, the atmosphere was tense and electrifying. The auditorium was packed with academics, students, and truth seekers, all eager to witness an unusual debate. On the stage sat an elderly man with an authoritative presence, Dr. Dilbert, a 62-year-old atheist scientist renowned for his sharp arguments against the existence of God. However, what truly captured everyone's attention was not just Dr. Dilbert, but his opponent, a 7-year-old boy standing with unwavering confidence. His name was Aurelian, a young Muslim boy with an innocent face but extraordinary intelligence. The audience murmured in disbelief. How could a mere child stand against a scientist who had spent decades debating and researching the non-existence of God? Was this a joke, or was something far greater about to unfold? Dr. Dilbert smirked, clearly underestimating his opponent. All right, little one, he said in a calm but condescending tone. You want to prove that God exists? I have debated with professors and philosophers, and I have always had an answer for them. What could you possibly say that I haven't heard before? Aurelian didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his small pocket and pulled out a handful of salt, holding it up for everyone to see. Doctor, he said clearly, can you describe the taste of this salt without tasting it? A hush fell over the room. The audience exchanged puzzled glances, trying to decipher the meaning behind the question. Dr. Dilbert raised an eyebrow and responded, Of course not. I would have to taste it first to know what it tastes like. Aurelian nodded slowly. Then, if you cannot see or feel something before experiencing it, Does that mean the salt does not exist? Dr. Dilbert hesitated. He had not expected such a question from a child. A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience as people began to process the depth of Aurelian's words. Recovering quickly, Dr. Dilbert leaned back in his chair and chuckled. "Nice trick," he said, his tone still dismissive. "But listen to me carefully, boy. The difference between salt and God is that salt can be tested. I can see it, touch it, and taste it. If I want to prove its existence, I simply have to experience it physically. But God, no one can see, touch, or directly experience Him. So how can you compare something scientifically provable with something that is purely based on belief?" Some in the audience nodded in agreement, finding Dr. Dilbert's argument logical. But Aurelian remained unfazed. Instead, he smiled. "Doctor, you just said that one cannot taste salt without tasting it, correct?" Dr. Dilbert nodded. "Of course." Aurelian held up the salt again. "What if someone was born without a sense of taste? What if there were people who could not perceive salty or sweet flavors? Does that mean the salt has no taste?" The room fell silent once again. Dr. Dilbert frowned, clearly caught off guard. He hesitated before replying. "Well, no. The salt still has a taste. It's just that the person lacks the ability to perceive it." Aurelian's smile grew. "Exactly. So if a person cannot taste something, does that mean it doesn't exist? Or does it simply mean that they lack the ability to perceive it?" Gasps echoed through the audience. Whispers spread as people realized the young boy had just flipped the scientist's logic against him. Dr. Dilbert, for the first time in the debate, seemed momentarily lost for words. Regaining his composure, he leaned forward. "You make an interesting argument," he admitted. "But the problem is not that humans lack the ability to perceive God. The real issue is that God never truly reveals Himself. If He exists, why doesn't He show Himself to us? Why should we just believe without proof?" More heads in the audience nodded. It was a question that had challenged the minds of many skeptics. But Aurelian didn't seem troubled at all. In fact, he chuckled softly. "Doctor," he said gently, "may I ask you something simple?" Dr. Dilbert studied him for a moment before answering. "Go ahead." Aurelian took a deep breath. "Do you love your mother?" Dr. Dilbert blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected question. After a brief pause, he responded, "Of course." Aurelian nodded. "Can you show me your love for your mother in a way that we can see?" Dr. Dilbert was silent. Aurelian continued, "Love is something we cannot see, hold, or measure with numbers. But we all know it exists. We can feel it, see its effects and actions, and understand its presence, even though we cannot touch it directly." He paused, then locked eyes with Dr. Dilbert. "The same is true for God. We may not see Him directly, but we can feel His presence, witness His signs in our lives, and recognize His existence through His creation. Just as love does not need to be seen to be real, God does not need to be physically visible to exist. We just need to open our hearts to feel Him." A heavy silence enveloped the room. Some in the audience who had previously nodded in agreement with Dr. Dilbert now looked uncertain. Even Dr. Dilbert himself seemed momentarily uneasy. Clearing his throat, he straightened his posture and attempted to steer the debate back in his favor. "You talk about feelings, subjective experiences," he argued. "But in the world of science, we cannot rely on feelings alone. We need concrete proof. If you claim that God exists, where is the evidence? Where is the tangible proof that God created the universe? Isn't it possible that science can explain everything without the need for God?" Aurelian took a small breath and picked up another pinch of salt, holding it tightly in his palm. "Doctor, do you know why salt is salty?" Dr. Dilbert scoffed. "Of course. Its composition, sodium chloride, has chemical properties that give it a salty taste." Aurelian smiled. "That's correct. But does salt know that it is salty? Dr. Dilbert frowned. What kind of question is that? No, salt doesn't know anything. It's just an inanimate object. It has no awareness of its own properties. Aurelian nodded. Exactly. Salt does not understand itself, but we, who have consciousness, do. We have the ability to perceive and comprehend things that do not recognize themselves. Similarly, the universe cannot explain itself, but we, as conscious beings, can see that there is a force that governs everything. There is an intelligence that set the laws of nature, that created balance, and that allows life to exist. He looked Dr. Dilbert straight in the eye. And that intelligence is God. For the first time in his long career, Dr. Dilbert found himself speechless. He clenched his fingers on the table, struggling to form a response. He had debated scholars, philosophers, and theologians, yet here he was, cornered by the simple, yet profound logic of a 7-year-old child. The tension in the room was palpable. The audience sat in stunned silence, realizing they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Previously, those who had supported Dr. Dilbert were now beginning to see Aurelian in a different light. Some of them appeared to be questioning their own beliefs. Dr. Dilbert finally took a deep breath. He needed to regain control of the situation before he lost it entirely. Okay, he said, his voice softer this time but still firm. I understand where your thinking is headed, Aurelian. But there is one question that no one, including religious leaders, has been able to answer. If God exists, why is there so much suffering in this world? Why do war, famine, and natural disasters occur? If God is all-loving, why does he allow children to starve, innocent people to suffer, and humans to harm one another? Some members of the audience, who had previously been influenced by Aurelian, nodded in agreement. This was a question that often arose in debates about the existence of God. However, Aurelian remained calm, showing no sign of fear. Instead, he nodded slowly, as if this was a question he had pondered for a long time. Good question, Doctor, he said softly. And I would like to answer it with something as simple as salt. He turned to the audience. Who here has ever eaten food that was too salty? Several people raised their hands, including Dr. Dilbert. How does it taste? A man from the front row answered. It doesn't taste good. Too much salt makes you thirsty. Aurelian nodded. And what if the food has no salt at all? A woman answered. It's tasteless. Aurelian turned back to Dr. Dilbert. Doctor, salt is something good, isn't it? But if there's too much, the food becomes inedible. On the other hand, if there is no salt at all, the food is bland and flavorless. So, is salt good or bad? Dr. Dilbert paused for a moment before answering. It depends on the amount. Aurelian smiled. Exactly. The same applies to suffering, Doctor. If this world were filled only with happiness and no suffering at all, would we truly understand what happiness is? If there were never any pain, how could we appreciate health? If there were no difficulties, how could we feel the joy of success? He paused, allowing his words to sink into the minds of the audience. God created this world with balance, just like salt and food. Not all suffering is punishment, and not all happiness is a reward. There is wisdom in both. This world is a test, and humans have the freedom to choose how they face it. If everyone were forced to be good without any choice, would that truly be considered goodness? The audience began to reflect more deeply. Even those who had been skeptical at first now appeared to be reconsidering their stance. Dr. Dilbert bit his lip. He hadn't expected a child so young to explain such a complex concept with something as simple as salt. But he wasn't ready to give up just yet. Leaning back in his chair, he said, Well, I understand your logic. But one question still remains, why does God need to test us? If he is all-knowing, doesn't he already know who will pass and who will fail? Aurelian smiled again. Doctor, have you ever been a teacher? Dr. Dilbert frowned. Of course. I have taught at the university for decades. Then when you give an exam to your students, do you already know who will pass and who will fail? Dr. Dilbert sighed. Yes, usually I can guess based on how they studied during the semester. Aurelian nodded. Then if you already know, why do you still give the exam? Dr. Dilbert fell silent. You already know who is diligent in their studies and who is lazy. Aurelian continued. But the exam still needs to be conducted, doesn't it? Why? Because the test isn't just for you as a teacher, it's for the students themselves. So they can see their own weaknesses, improve, and grow. The room was silent again. Aurelian gazed at Dr. Dilbert, his eyes filled with unwavering conviction. The same applies to Allah. He is all-knowing. He knows who will pass and who will fail. But the test is not for him, it is for us. So that we may see where our faith stands. So that we may grow, improve, and become better. If we are never tested, how would we ever know our own strength? Dr. Dilbert lowered his head. Those words shook him. His whole life, he had believed that everything could be explained through science. But today, a child had made him question his own beliefs. He searched for a counterargument, but none felt strong enough. The audience, who had been listening attentively, now appeared deeply moved. Some even had tears in their eyes. A man in the corner raised his hand, his voice trembling. This child, he's only 7 years old, yet his words have struck deeper than any academic debate I have ever heard. I feel something changing in my heart after listening to this. A woman nodded. Me too. I always thought religion was rigid and full of rules. But today, I see a depth that cannot be explained by logic alone. Dr. Dilbert lifted his eyes to look at Aurelian. But this time, there was no trace of condescension, only shock and something unfamiliar, doubt in his own beliefs. He wasn't ready to admit it, not yet. But something inside him had started to shift, and he knew this debate was far from over. Sitting still in his chair, Dr. Dilbert reflected. For years, he had been in control of debates, but this time, it was different. Aurelian's words had shaken his mind. Every argument he put forward was not only answered effortlessly but also backed with logic that left him speechless. Yet, despite the growing doubt in his heart, his ego resisted. He could not let a 7-year-old child make him look defeated in front of the public. He took a deep breath and straightened his posture. Okay, Aurelian. I admit that your explanation about tests is quite intriguing. But I still have one question. If God exists, and He is truly all-just, why is there so much injustice in this world? The room fell silent again. Dr. Dilbert continued, his voice full of conviction. Look at the world around us. There are people who work hard all their lives yet remain poor, while others are born into wealthy families and receive everything without effort. Some babies are born with disabilities, while others are born perfectly healthy. Good people suffer, while bad people thrive in luxury. If God is truly just, why does life feel so unfair? Some members of the audience nodded slowly. This was a difficult question, one even believers often struggled with. Aurelian paused for a moment, looking calmly into Dr. Dilbert's eyes. Then, he raised his hand and pointed to a glass of water on the table. Doctor, have you ever seen water spill from a glass? Dr. Dilbert frowned. Of course. Everyone has seen that. Then, when the water spills onto the floor, do you immediately say that it is wasted? Dr. Dilbert thought for a moment. Well, if it spilled accidentally, then yes, it would be a waste. Aurelian smiled slightly. But what if that spilled water is absorbed by the soil and eventually helps plants to grow? Would it still be considered wasted? Dr. Dilbert was silent. Aurelian continued. So is this what you call injustice? You see it only from one side, Doctor, but you forget that life is not just about what happens in this world. Just like the spilled water earlier, we don't always see the end goal directly. We don't always understand the bigger plan behind it. But the injustice that is seen in this world does not mean that real justice does not exist. He looked directly into Dr. Dilbert's eyes, his voice soft but full of confidence. This life is not the end, Doctor. This world is just a small part of our journey. True justice does not always happen here, but it will definitely happen in the end. People who do good and suffer in this world will get their reward later. People who do evil and seem to escape justice here will not be able to run forever. God is very fair. It's just that humans are often impatient to see the results in this world, without realizing that life does not end here. The audience fell silent. Some people bowed their heads as if Aurelian's words had unlocked something in their hearts. But Dr. Dilbert still tried to hold on. He tapped his finger on the table and said, "But how can you be sure of life after death? There is no scientific evidence that proves its existence. No one who has died has ever returned to tell us what happens afterward. How can you be so sure that there is a reward after death?" Aurelian smiled. "Doctor, have you ever had a dream?" Dr. Dilbert frowned. "Of course, everyone has had a dream. When you are dreaming, do you realize that it is just a dream?" Dr. Dilbert was silent for a moment. "Sometimes, no. Sometimes I feel like it's real, until I wake up." Aurelian nodded. "That's exactly how this life is, Doctor. Life in this world is like a dream, and death is when we wake up. When someone is having a nightmare, everything feels real, the fear, the suffering, but once he wakes up, he realizes it was only temporary. Living in this world is just a small part of a long journey. We will only truly wake up after death." Dr. Dilbert did not immediately answer. The boy's words pierced deep into his mind. For years, he had relied on science and logic, but Aurelian's explanation was so simple, yet difficult to believe. A woman in the back row raised her hand and said, "I have never thought about it that way before. All my life, I have felt that life is full of injustice. But if it's true that this life is just a small part of a bigger journey, then maybe there is a greater justice that we just cannot see yet." A PR officer next to her added, "Yes, I've always wondered about this. There is so much suffering, but maybe we just don't see the full picture." Dr. Dilbert felt his chest tighten. For the first time in his life, everything he believed in seemed to be crumbling. He looked at Aurelian with softer eyes now. "So, do you think this world is just a small part of something bigger?" Aurelian nodded. "Yes, Doctor. This world is not the final destination. It is just a transit point. Just as we cannot judge an entire journey based on a single day, we also cannot judge God's justice based only on this life." Dr. Dilbert lowered his head. His mind was filled with questions he had never considered before. For the first time in his life, he had no answers. And in his heart, something began to change. His sharp gaze softened, replaced with an expression that was difficult to explain, a mixture of shock, contemplation, and perhaps submission. For decades he had believed that everything had to be proven by science, logic, and measurable facts. But today, a 7-year-old boy had shaken his beliefs in a way he had never imagined. The room remained silent. All eyes were on Dr. Dilbert, waiting for his response. Some people in the audience looked moved, others deep in thought. Dr. Dilbert finally spoke, his voice softer than before. "I have never heard an explanation like that. I always thought life was only what we could see, touch, and prove. But you've given me a different perspective. You've made me wonder, have I been looking at the world from only one side all this time?" Aurelian smiled gently. "Doctor, there is nothing wrong with asking questions. Seeking the truth is part of our journey. But sometimes, the truth is not just something we see with our eyes, it is something we feel with our hearts." Dr. Dilbert took a deep breath. He realized that he had been arrogant in his thinking, always searching for answers that made sense to him without ever considering the possibility that there was something beyond his understanding. He looked at the young boy in front of him and asked in a softer tone, So, do you believe God exists, even though we cannot see him? Aurelian replied. Doctor, have you ever seen the wind? Dr. Dilbert frowned. No, I can only feel and see its effects. It is the same with God, Aurelian said. We cannot see him directly, but we can feel his presence through everything around us. We can see how the universe is so orderly, how our hearts can feel love and compassion, how justice still happens even when it is not immediately visible. All of these are signs of God's existence. Dr. Dilbert lowered his head. The boy's words struck deep. I don't know what to say, he finally admitted. Someone in the audience clapped softly, followed by others, not because there was a winner or a loser, but because everyone felt that something extraordinary had just taken place. Dr. Dilbert stared at Aurelian with contemplation. I can't say that I immediately believe, but today you have given me something more valuable than any debate I've ever had. You've given me a new thought to explore. Aurelian smiled. Searching for the truth is the first step, Doctor. Allah always guides those who sincerely seek him. The atmosphere in the room felt warmer now. What had started as a debate had turned into a moment of profound learning for everyone. Dr. Dilbert stood up and extended his hand. Thank you, Aurelian. I will remember this day. Aurelian accepted the handshake with great respect. May you find the answers you seek, Doctor. The room filled with genuine applause, not for victory, but for the realization that something profound had happened. This was not just a debate between logic and faith. It was an encounter that showed how they could complement each other. Many believe that everything must be proven by science and logic. However, there are many things in this world that cannot be explained by numbers and theories. The existence of God, true justice, and life after death require more than just physical evidence. They require a heart willing to accept and a mind open to deeper understanding. Aurelian, with his innocence and wisdom, taught us that faith is not just something to memorize or learn. It is something that can be felt and understood with the right logic. Meanwhile, Dr. Dilbert, despite decades in academia, realized that there were still things he had yet to fully understand. This shows that it is never too late to seek the truth, as long as we are willing to open our hearts and minds. Life is not just about what we can see. There are greater things beyond our understanding. And for those who truly seek the truth, God always provides guidance in the most unexpected ways.